The stories presented in this video are real, but we have changed the characters' names and altered images to protect their identities. The creator of this video is not an investigative officer. These narratives have been sourced from various internet platforms. Our intent is not to accuse or target anyone in particular. Thank you for understanding.
Welcome to True Crime Stories Hub. July 21st, 2011. In Boynton Beach, Florida, an apparently ordinary suburban neighborhood awakens to mayhem as police storm a married couple's house. Although the house is almost too calm, a scandalous scheme is taking place behind closed doors. An unsettling narrative of deceit, manipulation, and an almost flawless crime will be revealed. The paths of Dahlia and Michael DiPolito unexpectedly collided in the summer of 2008. Mutual friends introduced Michael to Dahlia, who was eager to start over after a difficult relationship. She was youthful, attractive, and vibrant, everything he could have hoped for. Unquestionably charming, she was a real estate agent. Michael fell in love almost instantly. In August 2008, they started dating, and things progressed swiftly. Dahlia appeared to be Michael's ideal match. She always gave him the impression that he was the center of her attention. Only 2 months into their relationship, in October 2008, Michael made the proposal. He thought he had at last found someone who embraced him for who he was and could look past his difficult history. Dahlia, however, was keeping secrets of her own as their brief affair went on. Dahlia was less forthright than Michael, who had been candid about his history, his time spent in jail for fraud, and his efforts to start again. She didn't tell Michael everything, but she did tell him she loved him. Dahlia had a secret side that was motivated by a desire for power and fortune. They were wed by February 2009. But Dahlia was already planning beneath the surface. Dahlia had been surreptitiously withdrawing funds from Michael's accounts without his knowledge. Although she pretended to be managing their money, she was actually taking steps to ensure her own future. Using the argument that it would improve their financial stability, she even persuaded Michael to change the title of their recently acquired townhouse into her name. Michael had all faith in her. Dahlia's deceptive actions became increasingly obvious as the months went by. Subtly implying that perhaps Michael wasn't suitable for her, she started sowing doubts about their relationship in May 2009. However, love blinded Michael. He disregarded the warning signs since he was so determined to keep their marriage together. Dahlia was sick of the charade by the summer of 2009. She was in charge of all of Michael's possessions, including the house and the money. She didn't want Michael anymore, though. Rather than abandoning him, Dahlia concluded that eliminating Michael from the picture was the only way to achieve her goals. The main tale starts at this point. Dahlia DiPolito's sentiments for her husband, Michael, changed significantly as spring gave way to summer. For her, the life that had appeared ideal now felt like a prison. The opulent vehicles, the exquisite house, and the cozy way of life all came to represent a life she no longer desired, at least not with Michael. Dahlia yearned for complete control and independence. She thought about getting a divorce, but she brushed it off. Dahlia wasn't prepared to part with half of what they had created because a divorce would require them to share everything. She wanted every last money and asset. Michael also blocked her path. Dahlia started spending more time by herself at the end of May 2011, using excuses to avoid Michael. She was actually coming up with a plan, even though she pretended to be working late or meeting with clients. She began looking into methods for making someone vanish. She considered poisoning Michael at first, but she quickly realized it would be too dangerous and could be readily linked to her. Something clean that wouldn't point right at her was what she needed. Dahlia's discontent escalated into something far more serious in early June. She confided in a friend who she believed could assist her in locating the ideal candidate to complete the task. A man who might be able to help was mentioned by this friend, who had some questionable contacts. Dahlia found it fascinating. Dahlia had gotten in touch with the man by June 15th. He presented himself as a specialist who, for a fee, could solve issues similar to hers. To go over the specifics, they gathered in a small, remote eatery. Dahlia was anxious, but she did a good job of hiding it. "I wanted to look like a robbery gone wrong," she informed him. Their house was to be ransacked to give the impression that it had been broken into, and Michael was to be slain there. The man gave her an estimate of $7,000 when she asked how much it would cost. Even though the cost was high, Dahlia didn't think twice. She consented to pay $200 in advance for a wine and the remaining amount after the job was completed. Dahlia went about her everyday business as usual for the next week, acting as though nothing had changed. However, she was planning the murder behind the scenes. She gave the man the down payment on June 23rd and gave him thorough details regarding Michael's schedule, the design of their home, and even the ideal time to perform the act. She left nothing to chance. She was cold and calculated. Dahlia stayed composed as the days went by. To keep Michael unaware, she even planted the seeds of normalcy by telling him she was organizing a trip for the two of them after her work settled down. However, she continued to count down the days until Michael's permanent departure. It was no longer about marriage or love. It was about greed and survival. Dahlia DiPolito thought she was going to obtain all she desired by the middle of July. She was unaware that the man she believed to be a hitman was actually a police undercover agent. After hearing reports and seeing Dahlia's odd behavior in the past, the Boynton Beach Police Department had begun to suspect her. In an attempt to capture her in the act, they set up a sting operation. Dahlia reconnected with the undercover officer on July 17th. She laid out her strategy in terrifying detail in a tiny, dark parking lot. She described Michael's daily schedule, including the precise times when he would be by himself at home. She explained the layout of their house and indicated the ideal locations for the robbery. Dahlia even talked about her desire for the murder to appear swift, tidy, and like a botched break-in. The police, who were assembling a strong case against her, videotaped all of this. Dahlia had another meeting with the officer on July 18th. She was even more determined this time. She gave him a recent photo of Michael and a $1,200 down payment. Dahlia's countenance was icy, her voice steady, and she was totally composed. She told the police she was 5,000% certain she wanted her husband dead throughout their talk, demonstrating her seriousness. Her smooth delivery of the words demonstrated how intense her desire to get rid of Michael had grown. The Boynton Beach Police Department thought it was time to take action because Dahlia's intentions were so obvious. They told Michael about his wife's homicidal scheme on July 19th. Michael, shocked but eager to assist, consented to take part in a fictitious operation to apprehend Dahlia. The strategy was straightforward but successful. Dahlia's response to the news would be recorded while they staged Michael's death. They made it appear as though Michael had been horribly murdered, splattered his body with blood, and took pictures to use as proof once he was moved to a secure area. The police were getting ready to see Dahlia in the meantime, curious to see how she would react if she believed her plan had been successful. Dahlia was unaware that the walls were closing in on her as she went about her day. She thought that everything was coming together and that she would soon be able to let go of Michael and live the life she had always wanted. However, her strategy would begin to fall apart by the end of July 19th, culminating in a dramatic showdown she never anticipated. The police operation was launched as the sun rose over Boynton Beach on July 21st. Officers silently approached the DiPolito residence at 6 in the morning. They were responding to a report regarding a domestic disturbance that they had organized themselves. Everything was set up with care. The police had set up a gory scene inside the residence. Michael DiPolito, who was still alive but in hiding, was staged to appear as though he had been shot during a break-in. Broken furniture, bloodstains, and evidence of a forced entry were all carefully placed to give the impression that a violent crime had been committed. The officers were aware that in order to make Dahlia's plan fail totally, they needed to get every aspect just right. Dahlia DiPolito was contacted by the police 1 hour later at 7 a.m. They told her that she had to come right away because something horrible had happened at her house. There was no denying the urgency in their voices. Dahlia hurried to the site, thinking her plan had gone off without a hitch. When she got there, she saw that the house was encircled by yellow crime scene tape and that her street was lined with police cars. The mood was tight, and there were officers around. The police stopped her when she got closer to the residence. One cop clarified that there had been a break-in. Dahlia listened with wide eyes. "Your hubby was not present." Dahlia's performance started as the officer's comments lingered in the air. Tears filled her eyes as she gasped. Trying to play the widow, she gripped her chest. However, the cameras were rolling and the police were keeping a tight eye on things. Her response was precisely what they had anticipated: forced, premeditated, and emotionless. They were doing their part, but Dahlia was doing hers. Dahlia was taken to the police station about 7:30 a.m. She voluntarily cooperated when the officers asked for her assistance with the investigation. She thought she had everything under control and that her strategy was working. Dahlia was taken by surprise when she got to the station, though. She was met by the same undercover agent she had recruited to murder Michael. He was not acting like a hitman anymore. Now that he was a detective, he was prepared to come clean. The entire murder plot had been a setup, the officer stated. The cops had been following her every step, and Michael was safe and alive. Dahlia's facade started to fall apart as the realization hit her. There was no escape because she had been outwitted. The police had all the proof they required, including the money she had turned over, recordings of her spooky talks, and even the picture of Michael she had given to the alleged assailant. By 8 a.m., everything was obvious. Dahlia DiPolito was immediately taken into custody and accused of first-degree murder solicitation. There was no question about the overwhelming evidence against her. The police officers realized they had successfully thwarted her plans as they carried her away in handcuffs. The entire operation had gone off without a hitch, and Dahlia would now have to deal with the fallout from her actions. That morning's events marked not only the conclusion of Dahlia's scheme, but also the start of her demise. Because the police had been one step ahead, making sure that justice would be done, what she believed would be the ideal crime ended up becoming her own downfall. August of 2011. Dahlia DiPolito's case gained national attention as the summer came to an end. The public was enthralled with the tale of the endearing young lady who had attempted to have her husband killed. Eager to cover every moment of the trial, reporters set up camp outside the courthouse. Dahlia entered the courtroom on the first day of her trial on August 2, 2011. She was dressed modestly, maybe to arouse compassion, and she looked cool and composed. Her defense team, however, was frantically trying to figure out how to save her behind the scenes. The prosecution didn't take long to make their case. They presented the overwhelming amount of evidence they had against Dahlia in agonizing detail. The jurors listened to tapes of her conversations with the undercover agent. Dahlia's voice was cool, collected, and clear in those tapes as she talked about wanting her husband, Michael, dead. She discussed it as though she were organizing a routine task rather than the assassination of the guy she had vowed to love and cherish. Additionally, the prosecution produced the picture of Michael that Dahlia had turned over, the $200 she had paid in foreign currency as a down payment, and the thorough notes she had provided regarding his daily schedule. The defense team for Dahlia had a different version of events. They asserted that everything was a miscommunication and a disastrous reality TV stunt. They said that Michael and Dahlia had been collaborating to develop a scenario that would get them on a reality show. They contended that the hitman plot was a component of that strategy, a means of generating drama and attracting the attention of television producers. Instead of depicting Dahlia as a heartless murderer, they portrayed her as a lady enmeshed in a failed quest for celebrity. Witnesses testified during the month of August. In her testimony, the undercover agent who had pretended to be the hitman detailed Dahlia's approach to him, her words, and her unreserved transfer of the money. Other officers who were involved in the operation were also called by the prosecution, and they all attested to Dahlia's obvious objectives. She desired Michael's death. Dahlia's defense lawyers attempted to find weaknesses in the prosecution's case. They contested the recording's validity and contended that Dahlia was forced into a predicament by the police that she would not have otherwise encountered. Witnesses who said they saw Michael and Dahlia talking about their alleged reality TV idea were called forward. However, the evidence against Dahlia was overwhelming in spite of their efforts. The trial was coming to a head by early September. The final arguments from both sides were delivered on September 12, 2011. The jury was reminded by the prosecution of Dahlia's calculating and icy behavior. Dahlia was condemned by her own words when they played the recordings one final time. In contrast, the defense urged the jury to view Dahlia as a misguided individual who had become enmeshed in an uncontrollably wild delusion. The jury returned with its verdict on September 15, 2011, 3 days later. Dahlia DiPolito was convicted of soliciting first-degree murder after only a few hours of deliberation. As the verdict was read, there was silence in the courtroom. Dahlia, who had maintained her composure during the trial, began to lose it. She grasped the table's edge as though to stabilize herself as her face became pale. She was given a 20-year prison sentence by the stern-looking judge. Dahlia's beautiful life was reduced to the grim reality of a prison cell as she was carried away in handcuffs. Dahlia's legal battle did not end when she was led out of the courtroom. Her defense team promptly appealed, claiming that the police had trapped her using illegal methods and that the jury had been skewed by the extensive media coverage. Years would pass during the appeal, keeping Dahlia's tale in the news and leaving the public to question whether she was really the heartless murderer the prosecution claimed she was, or if there was more to the story. Dahlia DiPolito's courtroom drama turned into a story about greed, manipulation, and the extent one person would go to in order to have what they want. One chapter ended with her conviction, but the tale was far from over. A final twist in a story that had already taken so many unforeseen turns. The ensuing legal fighting would keep her destiny in the balance for years to come. Dahlia DiPolito's defense team persisted after her initial conviction in 2011. With numerous appeals and retrials, the case continued to garner attention throughout the ensuing years. Every effort was dramatic, with her lawyers claiming that Dahlia had been tricked by the police, that the trial was unjust, and that the jury was skewed by the media. The conviction was maintained in spite of these attempts, but Dahlia was adamant about clearing her name. Her lawyers filed a second appeal in 2014, arguing that she was coerced by the police into doing a crime she would not have otherwise thought to commit. They contended that the sting operation was less about enforcing justice and more about fabricating a dramatic tale. Dahlia's legal team continued even after this appeal was rejected. They persisted in calling for a new trial, claiming that she was unable to get a fair trial because of the extensive media publicity. By 2015, the case had returned to its regular place in the news cycle. True crime shows examined the case, television programs re-examined the story, and the public eagerly followed Dahlia's legal journey. By pointing to possible jury bias from the initial trial, her lawyers were able to obtain a second trial in 2016. As the prosecution produced the same incriminating evidence, the courtroom was tense once more. The jury was presented with the footage of Dahlia planning her husband's murder, the cash she gave the undercover agent, and Michael's picture. Dahlia DiPolito returned to court in 2017 in the hopes that things will turn out differently this time. Her legal team fought vehemently, bringing up Dahlia's alleged entrapment once more. She never really planned to carry out the murder, they said, and she had been coerced into striking the deal with the undercover cop. However, the prosecution retorted with the overwhelming evidence from the earlier trials. The jury carefully considered the facts and listened to hours of testimony. It was hard to ignore the recordings of Dahlia's cool-headed, strategic conversations about how to murder her husband. Despite the jury's deliberations, the verdict was obvious. Dahlia DiPolito was convicted of soliciting first-degree murder once more on June 21, 2017. But the sentence was different this time. Dahlia was sentenced to 16 years in jail by the judge, who took into consideration the years she had already served. Perhaps resigned to her destiny after years of legal fights, Dahlia displayed little emotion as the judge gave down the punishment. Knowing that her struggle for freedom would come to an end, she was led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. Although the case was still being covered by the media, public interest had started to decline at this point. What started off as a dramatic tale has become a protracted legal drama, with each new chapter contributing little to the overall plot. Once full of mystery and unexpected turns, Dahlia's narrative had reached a predictable end. The evidence against her was still too compelling to overcome, even after she made multiple appeals and her case gained publicity. The woman who had previously envisioned a life of wealth and freedom was now confronted with the fact that she would be incarcerated for the majority of her life as she was returned to prison. Dahlia DiPolito had written the last chapter of her novel, and it concluded with the harsh reality that justice had won out, rather than the spectacular triumph she had dreamed for. The long, silent years of incarceration that awaited her were all that remained after her attempts to flee her history had failed. Numerous questions remain unanswered in Dahlia DiPolito's account. How could someone so pleasant and seemingly regular be capable of such heartless planning? Why did she resort to such drastic means to achieve her goals? As we consider this case, it serves as a warning that even the most innocent facades can conceal the most sinister intentions. What would motivate someone to take such drastic measures? For more unbelievable real crime stories, subscribe and share your thoughts in the comments section below.